So now that the jam is doing its overnight prep, we're going to start on the salted caramel. Now, my preferred salted caramel recipe is actually quite easy to do, which also means that it's quite easy to get wrong if you make one single mistake, which I've realized in the past few times I've made it. So this time I'm really hoping to get it right. We're going to start with measuring out all my ingredients. So back to the scale. On you go. And we are going to start with measuring out the sugar. Now I am doing a double recipe. This recipe is actually from Sally's Baking Addiction, and I've been using it since uni, and I can absolutely swear by it once you get it right. But start off with 400 grams of sugar, just for the double up. Just a little bit too much. Yep. We've got the sugar. Then we get out the butter. So move this to the side and get a small plate for the butter. So the butter, for a single recipe, it's 90 grams. So obviously, since we're doubling it up, it's 180 grams. The actual recipe says to use unsalted butter and then to add salt to taste. I prefer to use salted butter as a kind of cheat method, just to kind of speed up the saltiness, especially since even with the salted butter, there is still some flavour lacking. And it's much harder to add salt when the butter has been unsalted, because then you realise just how much salt goes into it. But yes, so 180 grams of salted butter. And the best thing to do is to have them in cubes or in basically small squares, just so that they're easy to process down once they are being cooked. And also, best thing to do is to have all your ingredients at room temperature already. When they're cold, they do not cook as well, and it can lead to some separation in the actual pan, which you do not want. And just a little bit more. There we go, 180 grams. And then for the double cream. Now, the double cream, you can either measure the volume or you can weigh it on the scale. Either one is fine. And generally, they're about the same amount if you take into account room temperature and pressure and all that science stuff. I do take into account room temperature and pressure. So 240 ml or 240 grams of double cream. There you go. So that's that done. 2 ml over won't do too much issue. But yes, that's all my ingredients measured out and ready to use. So then we move over to the stove. Right, so now we're going to start on cooking the actual salted caramel. So put the pan on. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off by melting the sugar. And we're just going to let the sugar heat up in the pan, medium-high heat, and basically just keep stirring so that as the sugar melts, it doesn't burn or stick to the bottom of the pan, or even to the sides, which I have had happen before. So just regular stirring as it heats up. Now you can use a whisk for this. I just find it easier using a wooden spoon. I have had issues where the whisk has actually flicked the hot sugar out of the pan, which is very, very possible. So it's probably a bit safer to use a wooden spoon, but obviously it's all up to you, all up to the maker's discretion. Now your sugar will start to clump up, and this is when it starts getting very important that you keep stirring, because this is where the sugar has started to melt. Maybe lower the temperature a little bit, just to make sure it doesn't burn. Yes, and it should turn a nice golden colour as it melts. And obviously the sugar melting does take some time, so it requires a lot of stirring, a lot of patience. Don't increase the temperature too much or you'll damage the sugar. And the sugar melting properly is essentially the base of your salted caramel. If it burns, you've burnt the salted caramel. If it doesn't melt completely, then your salted caramel will be lacking the sugar and will have lumps later on. Essentially, you do just want it all to melt down completely. Lower the temperature if you have to, just to make sure it doesn't burn as it's melting. But sugar does require a very high temperature to melt. Don't forget that as well. And because it requires a very high temperature, this melted sugar is very, very hot. Don't forget that. Right, and there we go. The liquidy state has been reached. So, just a little bit longer, just to get rid of all the lumps, to make sure all the sugar is melted. But the majority of it has, which is why it's in this golden liquid form. Don't forget, this is very hot. Your pan will be very hot. Right, so the majority of it has now melted down. Very few lumps. So now, before it burns, we are going to add our butter. And we're going to stir it quickly. Now, it will be a lot of bubbling here. You essentially want it to all stir in, mix in completely. Keep it on a low heat. If you take it off the fire, then it risks clumping up, and that is not salvageable. Just keep mixing it. It should all mix in. Make sure it's all mixed in before you add your cream as well, because once you add your cream, if it's not all combined, it will also clump, form lumps later in the process, which you do not want, because at that point it is definitely not salvageable and you've wasted 3 ingredients. Sugar is probably the cheapest to get, butter next, but double cream is more expensive, definitely. At least I found. Right, this is mostly mixed in. Just a bit more and it should all stir in completely. Again, be careful. This is why I've picked a high-sided pan, because if you've noticed, as I'm stirring, the butter is going up the side of the pan, and if that splashes over, it's gonna hurt. And now, turn the heat up, because for the first bit, you need it to boil over. So, stirring and slowly add the cream, because the cream is cold and the caramel, the sugar and the butter is hot. And it will splash. So, make sure it's all stirred in. Once it's all stirred in, you leave it to boil for about 2 minutes. And it should rise in the pan as it's boiling. Right, so that's it all boiled over and done. I boiled it for about 1 to 2 minutes. And now that I've turned it off, as soon as you've boiled it for 1 to 2 minutes, you can just turn it off completely and you leave it to cool. And once it's cooled down a bit, not completely, otherwise it'll get stuck in the pan, but once you've let it cool down for about 5 minutes, that's when you can taste it, make sure there's enough salt in it. Even if you've used salted butter, it might not be salty enough. I find that after all. And then once you've added the salt, you can jar it straight up and leave it to cool on the counter overnight. And then once it's cooled down on the counter overnight, you can put it in the fridge and it's ready for use. You don't even have to put it in the fridge before you start using it. I've been known to use it for salted caramel brownies. I've also used it for cupcakes. And once upon a time, I put it in my hot chocolate to make myself a salted caramel hot chocolate. And it was actually really, really good. So yeah, salted caramel essentially made and ready for use. So just one final bit. I've added the extra salt to the salted caramel. I needed to add like a teaspoon or so, which isn't that much actually, but it gives it that classic salted caramel flavour. And it actually highlights the flavour a lot more. And now that that's done, I'm just going to jar it up. Salted caramel keeps really, really well. Even if you don't completely sterilise the jars, as long as the jar is clean, it will essentially keep for ages if you don't eat it. So really it shouldn't stay in the fridge for that long because it's that good. Usually one usual size batch will produce maybe 1.5, 2 of these jars, small jars. I did obviously a double batch, so it's going to produce more than one of these small jars. Bits of salted caramel out of the pan. Wasting any. I just really like salted caramel a lot. Once I learned how to make it at uni, it became like an obsession, which is how I know how to make it so well and the different mistakes you can make. And I've also found that once you learn how to make it yourself, you become kind of judgmental on how other people have it and how it's made elsewhere, because you have your preferred way of having it because you can make it yourself. One fun joke is I threatened so I have a best friend whose husband really, really loves coffee, but it's like more like coffee connoisseur kind of coffee. So makes his own coffee, roasts his, gets his own personalized roasts and all that. And he knows that I love making salted caramel. And I've made her salted caramel brownies, I've made her Nutella brownies, and they really love it. And I threatened to bring a jar of salted caramel to their wedding just to have in my coffee. and he was scandalized, obviously. It was very, very funny. I didn't end up taking the salted caramel in the end because I was very, very busy that weekend anyway, and voila. Here's some salted caramel ready for use in baking and whatever else I want to use it in. Jar is hot, but essentially it looks like this. Should be this nice golden colour.